Hi, it's Nathan. The Managing Noise and Preventing Hearing Loss Code of Practice provides businesses with advice on how to protect their workers from noise hazards in the workplace. So the first few sections talk about noise and hearing damage in general and how that happens, how it accumulates over time. Then it talks about the exposure standard. So the exposure standard is like the safe levels of noise that we can be exposed to, with the most common being 85 decibels over an 8-hour period, but then that goes up depending on can go up or down depending on how long you're exposed to the noise. So for example, a 12-hour shift, you can only have like 80 decibels, and then you can go up to a maximum of 130 decibels, but only for 1 second. So that's how exposure standards work. Then it talks about like common hazards for noise. So most common are like plant and equipment, or like using hand tools, especially like high impact things like jackhammers, pile driving rigs, mobile plant. In some workshops, stationary equipment like lathes, presses, hydraulics, even like fans, loud fans. A good rule of thumb for 85 decibels is if you're standing about 1 meter away from someone and they need to raise their voice for you to be able to hear them, then the ambient noise or the noise in that work environment is going to be 85 decibels or higher. Then it goes through the hierarchy of control, so elimination, substitution, isolation, engineering, administrative, and PPE. So elimination, if we can get rid of the noise altogether, that's the gold standard, but not always possible. Substitution, so can we substitute the work method for something safer? Do we have a quieter machine, or can we use a work method that's quieter? Not always possible. Then we get to isolation. This is starts to be more practical, things that we can actually do most of the time. So things like putting the loud machines away from workers, also things like noise barriers. Then engineering controls. So engineering controls, you're going to rely on like the designers, manufacturers, and suppliers of plant to make sure that it has they have legal duties to make sure that plant is as quiet as possible. So like for anything with an engine should have a muffler on it. So then your duty as a PCB with management of that noisy machine is to make sure, like if we get a hole in the muffler, we get it fixed, or if the muffler falls off, we get it fixed, or if it's got noise dampeners or noise insulators or noise shielding on it, that we get that fixed. Then administrative controls, things like scheduling of work to limit the amount of noise workers are exposed to. And then finally, as a last line of defense, PPE. So it's kind of one of those things where you think about noise hazards, first thing goes, oh, we'll put in some earplugs. But legally you need to sort of consider those high level controls and then use PPE just as a last line of defense. Finally, it talks about audiometric testing, which is basically a type of health monitoring. So audiometric testing is basically when we employ someone, we send them off for a hearing test just to get a baseline level of how good their hearing function is. And then we test them every 2 years, with the idea being that we want to find out if we're sending them deaf, because that's bad that we are sending them deaf, but at least we've found out. Better to find out sooner rather than later. So the requirement for that is audiometric testing for workers who are required to wear PPE frequently as part of their job role. And then there's some differences interstate. So for example, for years, Queensland had pulled that section out of the regs, it's section 58, and then the code just references it, but now just recently put back in. So that's it. That's the code of practice for managing noise. Hope that helps.